Hello, loves. Today I have compiled quite a few good stories. Let's get started. Story: My mentally disabled brother spent 3 days in the house with my mother's dead body. He says something inhuman slunk through the house at night. I moved away from my hometown a few years ago. My father had committed suicide when I was a small boy, going out to the barn and shooting himself in the face with a shotgun. I barely remember him still. The only thing that stays with me from that day was my mother's agonized, wracking sobs when she found his mutilated body. Sometimes, during nightmares late at night, I still hear those same screams, repeating over and over like a skipping record. My little brother, Charlie, was born with Down syndrome. My mother took care of Charlie by herself since I moved away. I rarely talked to my family, something I feel increasingly guilty about looking back. Unbeknownst to me, my mother had a worsening addiction to pills and alcohol. To this day, I don't know if she intended to kill herself or not. But, after examining her corpse, the medical examiner concluded that she had a lethal combination of benzos, morphine and vodka in her system. When they found her body rotting in the summer heat in her bedroom 3 days later, they said she had one eye half open, her arms still outstretched towards the telephone, as if trying to call for help even in death. The police ended up finding my number a few days later. I lived over 5 hours away, but when I heard Charlie was being kept at the police station, I immediately took the day off of work and headed back towards my hometown of Frost Hollow. I remember driving through the rural town, a place of rolling hills and thick, dark forests, thinking how dead and empty the whole area looked. A lot of the houses that had been there when I was younger had since been demolished or lay barren, dilapidated and rotting. The police station in the center of town seemed to be one of the few places still open. I looked at the shuttered windows lining both sides of Main Street, seeing one out-of-business sign after another. On the bright side, however, there were plenty of parking spots along the cracked, empty streets. I got out of the car, seeing a feral, mange-covered dog ripping through bags of garbage in a nearby alleyway. The sickly sweet smell of decaying trash filled the air, thick and cloying. I entered the glass doors of the police station, finding an old crone pecking at a keyboard behind the front desk. She looked like a twisted dwarf, her eyes magnified to giant orbs behind her glasses. She looked up at me with a pale, bloodless face. "Yes," she said in an annoyed voice. "I'm here to pick up Charlie Benton," I said. The old woman looked behind her, where a tanned woman in a police officer's uniform was leaning against a rusted metal cabinet, looking through a file. "Sergeant Alvarez deals with that," the old woman spat, looking back at her computer. The police officer sighed, looking up at me with humorless eyes. A few moments later, she circled around, coming out the tinted black glass door around the side. The slow, erratic typing of the old woman continued ringing out like the ticking of a failing heart. Sergeant Alvarez had wide, almond-shaped eyes and jet black hair pulled back in a ponytail. She did not look happy to see me. "You're Dennis?" she asked. I nodded, pulling out my license. She inspected it closely before handing it back to me. "We found your brother in quite a state. He was covered in blood, naked from the waist up, wandering through people's backyards at night. When the police found him, at first he was unresponsive, as if he were sleepwalking or something. His eyes were open, but he was not talking and appeared to be looking at things only he could see. After about 30 seconds of this, they said he appeared to wake up, though he still wasn't giving coherent answers at first. He just kept saying, 'She was walking, she was walking.' Eventually, after a lot of trying, they were able to ask him about why he was wandering at night and why he was covered in injuries and blood. 'Your brother said something kept hurting him in the house at night and that he had to get out. He had marks on his body,' Sergeant Alvarez said, her eyes suspicious. Intelligence gleamed behind them. The strangest thing. It looked like someone had burned hand marks into his back and shoulders. I found this information disturbing on some instinctive, primal level, but I didn't know why. Who could have done that? I asked, confused. She shrugged. "Charlie couldn't tell us," she said. "Your mother had been dead for 3 days by that point, and the wounds on Charlie's body were fresh. Do you know if there was anyone else who regularly visited or lived in the house with them? I shook my head. My mother had no friends, I said. She was practically a hermit. She used to just stare out the window for hours when I lived there like a zombie. No one ever came to visit her. The black doors swung open again, and Charlie stood there next to a muscular police officer. Charlie's face had his typical vacant stare. Charlie appeared in his mid-20s, a sweaty, lumpy mass of a human being wearing a tight pinky and the brain t-shirt. His enormous belly hung over his belt, his shirt seemingly always pulled up to expose a few inches of naked flesh. He had confused, mud-brown eyes that rarely focused on anything for longer than a few seconds. But there were other times Charlie seemed to have an almost photographic memory, repeating entire conversations in his strange, droning monotone even months after they had taken place. "She is dead," he said, his muddy brown eyes unfocused. "She is dead." She was walking. I squinted at him, feeling cold dread dripping down my heart. "Charlie, buddy, it's okay now," I said, taking a step towards him. He looked up abruptly, seeming to just now realize that I was there. "Dennis," he screamed, his enormous belly jiggling as he ran forward. He wrapped his thick arms around me, his face filled with an innocent, childlike excitement. He lifted me off the ground. A breathy exhalation of fetid breath hit me directly in my face. I grunted as he squeezed the air out of my lungs. Charlie was immensely strong and often didn't realize his own strength. "You're crushing me, buddy," I grunted in a small, crushed voice. Charlie dropped me back down on the ground. I looked closer at him, seeing healing, sickly wounds peeking above the neckline of his t-shirt. A rainbow of black, purple, and blue marks hung there, formed in the shape of long, twisted fingers. The worst of them had drops of pus falling from the burnt craters in the center. I wondered how many more lay hidden beneath his clothes. Sergeant Alvarez gave me her card, telling me to call her if I found out any more information about the case or if Charlie remembered anything or was able to give more information in the future. I wondered who could have possibly been hurting Charlie. It made me feel sick and angry, thinking of someone following him around, scaring him and attacking him during the night. Charlie already hated and feared the dark as it was, adding another layer of cruelty to the disturbing case. He had feared it ever since he was a small boy. I walked him out of the police station, buckling him into the passenger seat of the car. As I sat down in the driver's seat, he looked over at me. Sweat glistened on his upper lip, and his goofy bowl cut of a haircut was sticking up in random spots. "Dennis, I saw her," Charlie said in his flat monotone. "She was walking. At night, I heard her feet. In the dark, I heard her feet." "Who was Buddy?" I asked. "Who did that to you? Did someone hurt you during the nighttime?" He nodded. A single tear fell from his squinty eyes, dripping down his round face. "It wasn't Mom?" He shook his head in response. His lips started quivering. He leaned close to me, whispering in a hoarse, terror-stricken voice. "The bone-faced woman," he hissed, breaking down in tears. I had contacted a team to remove the soiled items in the master bedroom after receiving a call from the police. The team told me it would be a fairly easy job, and that I would be able to stay in the house later that night. With no other living family except Charlie, I would undoubtedly inherit it anyway, though I had absolutely no intention of keeping it. I wanted to sell it as soon as possible, but I would have to go through everything and decide what, if anything, I wanted to keep. All of Charlie's stuff was also still in the house, which I knew we would need to go through and package regardless. It was a Friday, and I had the weekend off work. My plan was to finish moving everything out of my mother's house that weekend. Charlie and I pulled into the sprawling property that night, turning onto the flat, dirt driveway towards the old colonial. Sharp stones crunched rhythmically under the tires. I took in the sight, the large windows and wrap-around porch of the dark purple house. I saw my childhood neighbor, Sloan Herbick, standing outside on his front lawn. Behind him loomed his Victorian house, a blood-red building of sharp turrets and dark, dusty windows. Sloane Herbeck was a strange man in more ways than one. He had been burned horribly as an infant in a crib fire, barely surviving with his life. Melted folds of lumpy scar tissue covered most of his body, including his face and head. Miraculously, he hadn't lost his eyesight, nose, or lips, but both of his ears were missing as well as all the hair on his head except his long, black eyelashes. His horrifyingly scarred body looked nearly as pale as an albino's, but his eyes were as dark as sin. I remembered Sloane as an arrogant, aloof man with no friends, about 10 years older than myself. According to what my mother told me as a teenager, Sloane's mother had gone missing when I was little, during the time when they were constructing our then brand new home in Frost Hollow. By now, I thought, he must be at least 40, though the keloid scars and mutilated ridges of flesh running over his entire body made it impossible to tell. As I got out of the car, I gave a neighborly wave, but Sloane ignored me. He stared fervently down at the hole, slamming the sharp tip of the shovel into the earth over and over again at a frenetic pace. I walked by Charlie's side up the rickety wooden steps to the front porch, pulling the spare house key out of my pocket from so many years ago. With trembling fingers, I slid the key into the lock, finding that my keys still worked, as I knew they would. The door opened onto a dark, sinister hallway. A nauseating odor emanated from the house, blowing out the front door like the rancid breath of some primordial monster. It was the smell of rotting bodies, clotted blood, and infection. It left a slightly sweet aftertaste. Gagging, I flipped on the light switch. I took a step forward, but Charlie didn't follow. He stared up at me with an unusual intensity, taking his huge, round arms and crossing them over his chest. The front of his dirt-caked sneakers came up the perimeter of the threshold, but he refused to go any further. He just shook his greasy, sweat-covered face. "Come on, buddy," I said encouragingly, giving him a wide smile. "What's wrong?" He pointed behind me, down the hallway. I instantly looked over my shoulder, my heart leaping up like a jackrabbit. Having watched far too many horror movies, I expected to see some blood-streaked hag standing there with a face like a skull and an ear-to-ear grin. But the hallway lay empty. "She's still here," Charlie said slowly, his eyes giant, glassy orbs of terror. "She is dead." "Mom's not here, buddy," I answered, ambling back toward him and taking one of his enormous hands in mine. I could feel the width of it, the smooth flatness of his palms except for one thick ridge. "Mom's at the funeral home. We're going to see her Sunday, remember?" Charlie shook his head again, his hair flying everywhere. "This place is bad," he said. "We've got to stay here for the weekend, Charlie," I responded, feeling a rising sense of irritation. "I already explained it all to you. The house is fine. They took the dead body out already, so what's the problem? You'll be with me the whole time." "It will be bad," Charlie said, sweating heavily. "It won't be scary, buddy. I promise." Looking back, it is hard to imagine any more untrue words than those. Much of the stuff from my mother's room had been taken out by the cleaning team. They told me that some of her fluids had burst from her body, staining the mattress and bed frame with their black rot. Luckily, not much had gotten on the floor, but a small puddle had dripped down. The guest bedroom was directly underneath Mom's room, just a small, square room on the first floor with a bed, a dresser, and a TV. I kept the bedside lamp on all night. On the ceiling of the room, there was a Rorschach blot of dead, rotted fluids that still needed to be cleaned up. It was about the size of a basketball and looked like an eye. It had a dark, circular spot in the center, followed by thin, black tendrils that cracked their way towards the oval perimeter of the stain. Charlie crawled into bed next to me, putting a heavy, hot hand on my shoulder before falling asleep almost instantly. But I couldn't sleep. After what felt like an eternity, I looked over at the red lights of the alarm clock, seeing it was 3:32 a.m. I swore under my breath, sensing that my insomnia would not leave me alone this weekend in this place of horrors. At exactly 3:33, a jarring mechanical shrieking started outside. I jumped up in bed. Charlie awoke instantly. He sat up so fast that he smacked his head on the wall with a dull bank. "What the fuck is that noise?" I hissed, jumping out of bed. I looked up at the stain as I went, giving it a distrustful glance backwards. The mechanical caterwauling seemed to be growing louder as I made my way toward the front of the house. I went to the front window, seeing Sloan Herbeck running a wood chipper next to his totally dark house. I could just barely make out his dull silhouette, hearing the din of the constant grinding. Charlie gave an incomprehensible scream in the guest bedroom. I heard his heavy footsteps running toward me. His face was red and flushed, his pupils dilated and frantic. "The eye moved," he said, his voice having more emotion than I had heard in it in a long time. I blinked, the fog of sleep still clouding my mind. "You mean the stain?" I asked, finally figuring out what he was talking about. "The stain on the ceiling?" He nodded ferociously, bobbing his head up and down quickly. Eventually, I ended up talking Charlie down and getting him back to bed. The stain was still in the same spot, as far as I could tell. Around 4 a.m., the sound of the wood chipper finally died. In the eerie silence of the dark house, I fell into a nightmarish fever dream where I saw women bound with chains in a basement surrounding a mannequin wearing a suit made of human skin. The next morning, I went over to Sloane's house and knocked until he answered. While I waited, I studied the strange gargoyle knocker plastered across the scarlet door. At first, he would only crack it open a fraction of an inch, staring out at me with a single black eye. "Can you not run the wood chipper in the middle of the night?" I asked, giving him a faint, anxious half-smile. "It's keeping me and Charlie from sleeping." "I mean, you had the thing going at 3 a.m. last night." A few heartbeats later, the front door flew open. Sloane took a step towards me, until his scarred, alien face stood only inches from mine. "It's because of my skin, isn't it?" he asked in a hoarse, low voice. He spoke in a strange cadence, mumbling the words in dissonant rhythms. "If someone cut your eyes out so you couldn't see how ugly I am, you wouldn't care about the wood chipper anymore, would you?" I took a step back, the smile peeling off my face. I reached for the canister of police mace in my pocket, gripping it firmly and putting my hand on the trigger. "Sloane, that has nothing to do with that," I answered coldly, narrowing my eyes at him. "Don't act like a goddamn psycho. Look, if you keep that shit up, I'll call the cops. Don't fucking do it again." I had no patience for nut jobs like him. He always gave me the creeps. As a kid, someone had gone around pouring bleach into the eyes of people's cats and dogs, blinding them and leading to some getting euthanized. I always suspected Sloane of doing it, though he never got caught. My brother and I spent the rest of that day packing up anything we wanted to take with us, putting it in boxes and labeling it. Charlie didn't have a lot of possessions, and Mom didn't exactly have a lot of valuable items in her house, so it was fairly quick going. I figured I would either end up selling or donating most of the crap left behind in the end. Before I knew it, the sun had started setting again. The darkness of a moonless sky descended on Frost Hollow like a guillotine blade. My brother and I kept working, mostly in silence, though Charlie would come over and show me random objects he had recently acquired. "Rick," Charlie said, proudly holding up a plush doll of Rick from Rick and Morty. A trickle of fake drool dripped Rick's mouth, and a trickle of real one from Charlie's. I laughed, ruffling his hair as if he were a toddler. "That's right," I answered excitedly, "that's Rick." "You like Rick, buddy? You like how he just does whatever he wants whenever he feels like?" Charlie nodded excitedly at that. After a couple more hours of sorting, I decided to go to bed. I wanted to leave as early as possible on Sunday morning after the funeral, which was the next day. Charlie followed me like a puppy, his normally unfocused eyes flitting from one side to the other with a kind of intensity one had rarely seen there before. He constantly scanned the shadows, as if looking for something. We kept all the lights in the surrounding rooms and the guest bedroom. As I lay there, about to fall asleep, I glanced over at Charlie and saw him staring straight up at the stain with wide, watery eyes. I don't know how long it was later when I awoke suddenly in the pitch black. I blinked quickly, confused. And then I heard it, the noise that had caused me to sit up in bed. Right over me, I heard something gurgling and hissing in rhythmic breaths. It sounded as if whatever it was had lungs filled with blood and dirt. The terror I felt at that moment was incomprehensible. But it grew much worse when two burning, skeletal hands reached down and grabbed me. They covered my right arm in an iron grip, the thin, blade-like fingers feeling inhumanly long. I could feel my skin burning and melting. I screamed, kicking out with my legs and trying to pull away. I brought my left hand up, grabbing blindly for the thing's face. I groped in the darkness until I felt it, a face like a skull. It was slick and wet under my touch, sticky with clotted blood. I felt the muscles of its skeletal face thrumming and contracting. The thing had no skin. I repressed an urge to scream, instead reaching for its eyes, even as its burning hands continued yanking at my arm, trying to pull me off the bed. I felt a nose that was just a ragged hole of destroyed flesh, felt the fetid breath passing softly through those mutilated patches. I reached up into its eyes, but there were no eyes there, just two empty sockets. I reached inside and felt the skittering of insect larvae under my fingers. At the back of the empty socket, my fingers groped thin strands like fleshy wires that had been severed. With all of my strength, I stuck my finger deep down into that warm, twisting socket, stabbing my fingernails into the optic nerves and vessels at the back and ripping. The hands on my arm instantly released. I felt some of the melted skin go with them, heard the tearing of my flesh as warm blood instantly dripped from the wounds. Hyperventilating, my breath hissing with pain, I fumbled in my pocket for my lighter. I brought it up, flicking it. I caught a glimpse of the thing my brother called the bone-face woman, her naked, skeletal body running out of the room with a sickly gurgling of her diseased lungs. Overhead, the stain had turned into a real eye, a fleshy, black thing that flitted over the arm with a dilated pupil. It emanated insanity, its stare glassy and inhuman. Charlie lay on the floor, his eyes open but unseeing. My breath caught in my throat, the burning agony in my arm temporarily forgotten. I ran toward my brother, kneeling down over his limp body and shaking him. I saw fresh burn marks in the shape of a hand on his face, covering his forehead and temples. The cracked, broken flesh dribbled pus and blood like thick, clotted tears down his cheeks. When he didn't respond, I shook him again, grabbing him by the chin and forcing his eyes to meet mine. I saw him blink. He inhaled like a drowning man, grabbing my hand tightly and shaking his head from side to side. "She was here," he whispered. "She is dead, Dennis. She lives in the dirt. We need to get out of here and never come back," I said, trying to pull Charlie up. He was far too heavy. "Can you get up, buddy? Come on, we'll leave now." With great difficulty, Charlie pulled himself up. His eyes started watering as the weeping burn marks continuously dripped a rainbow of clotted fluids. I took out my phone, trying to call for help, but nothing was working in the house anymore. The electricity had gone off, which was why the lights had all gone out, but that wouldn't explain why my fully charged cell phone had gone black as well. Charlie and I stumbled outside. I put him in the passenger's seat of the car, deciding to get the hell out of there and never come back. But when I tried to turn the starter, the car didn't make a sound. The engine didn't even make an attempt to turn over. "It's her," Charlie whispered, his face a mask of terror and pain in the darkness. "The bone-face woman wants us to stay." "Well, she can go fuck herself," I spat, anger and fear mixing in a toxic sludge in my blood. I watched the house closely, seeing the curtains at the front moving. I caught an occasional glimpse of that abomination peeking out at us with her empty eye sockets and skinned face. I looked at Sloane's house, realizing I could call for help from there. He was the only neighbor within a half-mile radius. "Charlie, the car's not working and I need to call for help. I'm going to go across the street and use Sloane's phone to call the cops. I want you to lock yourself in the car. Don't open the door for anyone except me or the cops. You got that?" I asked, keeping a constant watch on the house, expecting the bone-face woman to slink out after us at any moment. She is dead, Charlie said robotically. She is walking. She will not let us leave. After I had made sure Charlie had locked himself in the car, I sprinted over to Sloane's dark Victorian house. I ran up the porch steps, ready to start knocking frantically on the door. But as soon as I touched it, it creaked slowly open, showing a dimly lit kitchen. A single oven light was turned on. I looked around in disgust. The place was filthy. Mold-covered pots and pans covered the stovetop. Drying crusts of filth covered a mountain of dishes emerging from the sink. Maggots and other insects feasted like kings here. The white reflections of glittering rat and mouse eyes peeked out at me from the corners of the room. Sloane? I called, not wanting to be too loud. Even though I wouldn't have admitted it to him, I was, quite honestly, terrified of Sloane Herbick. There was something off about that man. I left the kitchen, moving to the living room. There was only a single night light in here. All around me loomed naked human skins nailed to the wall. They rose in 2 rows, the bottom row offset from the top by a few feet so that more of the space could be used. I crept closer with wide eyes, realizing that the vast majority were just latex or silicone. Not all of them, however. Stuck randomly among the fake hanging skins were some that looked different. These looked thicker and had soft ridges running over their surface. I even saw signs of belly buttons, tattoos and nipples on these leathery skins. At that moment, I knew without a doubt that they were human. Many looked ancient and cracked, the leather falling apart at the shoulders or waist. There was a couch covered in what looked like gore in the center of the room facing a TV and DVD player. On a small, wooden table next to it lay a phone and a blood-encrusted meat cleaver. Shaking with excitement and fear, I crept closer to them, immediately grabbing the weapon. I took Sergeant Alvarez's card from my pocket, calling it. She answered on the second ring, sounding tired. "Hello," she said. "Sergeant Alvarez speaking." "This is Dennis Benton," I whispered furtively. "I need help immediately. Send an ambulance and police to my mother's house at 332 Angel Trace Road. Something's happened." "Where are you right now?" she asked. "I'm at my neighbor's across the street, but there's, body parts everywhere. I think he might be a serial killer. I don't know what the fuck's going on here, but please, hurry." I gently put the phone back down on the cradle, hearing a floorboard creak behind me. Sloane Herbick stood there, his dark eyes blazing. He pointed a pistol straight at my head. Looking down the barrel felt like looking into eternity. He was wearing a suit made of what looked like pale, white human skin. It covered him from head to foot, hugging his body with precision. All of the thread and sewing marks were expertly hidden. It almost made him look like some strange alien nudist, wearing a suit of white leather. At his feet, he had an open canister of gasoline. With practiced ease, he kicked it over, letting the pungent liquid spill out onto the floor all around me. "Hey man, you don't have to do this," I said, trying to act calm but quivering inside. I expected him to pull the trigger at any second, and then it would be lights out forever. "I've already started," he said, grinning and pointing out the window. I saw my house burning across the street. I felt the blood drain from my face as I thought about Charlie, sitting there in the car with his childlike innocence. I hoped he would know to get out in time. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, horrified. "I never did anything to you." "Everyone who looked at me did something to me," he spat. "They hated me because I'm ugly and burned. But now I have a new skin, so people can't hate me anymore. I made it myself, and this face?" He pointed at the dried human skin wrapping around his head. "This is my mother's. She was one of my first, but she never truly left, you see. She told me, take it. This is my body, given to you. Take my skin, take my face and my hair, and from it, make yourself a new body. Make yourself a thing of beauty, as soft and pale as winter moonlight. After I killed her, I buried her under the dirt in your house, back when it was being built. I knew they would pour the foundation the next day. All those tons of concrete covered her, took her away, and then no one ever knew what happened. He shrugged. It had to be done, to make me whole again. No mother could see her own son become a twisted, ugly thing, after all. The rest of the skin mostly came from prostitutes. I find female skin is much softer, more malleable, and easier to work with. They also take better care of their skin than men. He laughed softly at this. Okay, so you've already finished your suit, I said, sweating heavily. So let me go. I have nothing to do with this. He smiled an insane rictus grin behind his leathery mask. I only need one more piece, and that is the soles of the feet, he answered in his cold, psychopathic way. I'll get those from you. Goodbye, Dennis. It was nice seeing you again. At that moment, Charlie stumbled in the room, his movements loud and ungraceful. Sloane turned, surprised. A heartbeat later, Charlie slammed his heavy body against Sloane's back, sending him flying. The pistol went off, the bullet missing me by inches. I heard it whiz over the top of my head and smash into the ceiling above me. Cold dread worked its way down my spine as I realized I had just missed death by inches. Sloane landed on his stomach at Charlie's feet. Screaming, Sloane put his left hand up, revealing a Zippo lighter there. He flicked it, throwing it at the pile of gasoline. I backpedaled quickly, trying to go around the blazing ball of fire and get to Sloane. Get the gun! I screamed at Charlie. Charlie looked down at Sloane with slow comprehension dawning in his face. He took one massive sneaker and stomped down on Sloane's right hand with the pistol in it. I heard the bone crack like twigs snapping. Sloane shrieked, trying to pull away, but Charlie continued leaning down on his arm, preventing him from moving it. The fire was creeping at an incredible rate, rising up the walls and across the ceiling. Thick, black smoke filled the room, suffocating us. I ran at Charlie, my eyes watering. I realized I was still holding the meat cleaver in one hand. I looked down at Sloane in his suit of human skin, still trying to raise the gun with his broken arm. I wanted to finish this quickly. I brought the knife down into the back of his neck, hearing the bone crack. There was a wet thud and a bubbling of blood as the meat cleaver bit deeply into through his spine, and then Sloane was still. Come on, Charlie, I said, grabbing his large hand. He wrapped his fingers around mine. Coughing and choking, we stumbled out into the night as police cars started pulling up. The first one had Sergeant Alvarez in it, who ran towards us, helping a stumbling Charlie toward the back seat of her car where he could sit down and catch his breath. Both houses were on fire now, blazing pillars of flame that rose high into the black, starless sky. At that moment, I only hoped that the flames would eat away the corpse of Sloane's mother, the bone-faced woman. Story: I visited a cult who kept their leader's body wrapped in Christmas lights and covered in glitter. I barely escaped with my life. The first time I saw Mother God, she lay in a blue sleeping bag, her face covered in glitter, her eyes missing. Someone had wrapped Christmas lights around her desiccated corpse, and now they strobed and twinkled merrily. Mother God is in stasis, a calm voice said from behind me. I turned, seeing Hope had followed me into the room. She was one of Mother God's most fanatical followers. She is taking all the poisons from the universe into her body. Soon, she will wake up and lead us towards ascension. You must hug Mother God, a deep male voice demanded. Through the shadows of the hallway, I saw Lama, a hulking mass of red hair and muscle. He held a pistol in one steady hand. She will take away your doubts and anxieties. I'm not hugging a goddamned corpse, I spat angrily, wondering how I kept getting into these bizarre situations. How come you guys didn't call a doctor when she was dying? What the hell is wrong with you people? Mother God is not dead. Lama screamed in an insane voice. How could God possibly die? And why would we call a three-dimensional doctor, anyway? Mother God is a five-dimensional being. They wouldn't even know where to start, Hope said, her eyes wide and gleaming. Lama nodded in fanatical agreement. I wondered where the rest of them were. I looked around, trying to find a way out. I knew they had my 2-year-old son downstairs, playing with the other kids who lived at the compound. If you don't hug Mother God, you will be recycled into the galactic center, Llama said, pointing the pistol in the middle of my forehead. He wore some strange combination of a shawl and a poncho, the once colorful material now dull and fraying. I could smell the sage and weed permeating his clothes. Llama looked at me with eyes the faded green color of swamp water. His long beard looked far greasier than the last time I had seen him, his skin sunken and gray. I turned, staring down at the mummified corpse. The papery flesh hung tightly to the grinning skull. The lips had been eaten away, showing yellowed, cracked teeth. The nose, too, had collapsed into the center of the face. 2 ragged sinus holes covered in dried yellowish pus and clotted blood marked the spot. The smell emanating from Mother God's desiccated body was sickening, a combination of cinnamon, feces, and rotting meat. "Do it," Llama demanded, shoving the barrel of the pistol into the small of my back. A sharp stabbing pain shot up my spine as I stumbled forward. "Do it," Hope repeated in her droning, emotionless voice. I looked down at the corpse sprawled across the floor. Inhaling deeply, I held my breath and lowered myself down on my knees. Mother God's grinning, half-decayed skull almost looked like it was trying not to laugh. I held my breath so as to avoid inhaling the rank odors rising from the decomposing body. Hesitantly, I leaned forward, extending my trembling hands towards Mother God. I wrapped my arms around the sleeping bag, hugging the corpse gently. I wanted to avoid releasing any more gas bubbles, as the entire room already smelled of infection and shit. Mother God's thin arms cracked like dry chicken bones. Black fluid dribbled from her mouth, reeking of sewerage and bacteria. I closed my eyes, trying not to vomit. "Isn't it beautiful?" Hope asked as I pushed myself up, wavering on my feet and trying not to puke. She stroked her long brown hair over and over, as if trying to calm herself down. "Can't you feel all the love radiating off of her? She is the center of everything, the storehouse of compassion." I nodded, continuously swallowing all the saliva flooding my mouth to try to keep from retching in front of these insane fanatics. The smell of feces and rot seemed to have grown stronger in the room. I remembered the children on the floor below us and felt a rising sense of horror as I realized they had been living in this house with a corpse for weeks. "I need to go check on Davy," I whispered, feeling my heart racing. Everything seemed unreal, as if I were trapped in a nightmare. Llama stood like a statue, the pistol pointed down by his side. His eyes were half closed, as if he were in some sort of stupor. Hope crept up behind him, putting her long fingers on his shoulder. Llama's eyes flew open as if he had just woken up. "Davy is fine," he said in a robotic monotone. "Everything is fine. We are one. We are one." Hope repeated excitedly. "All one." "Okay," I whispered slowly, looking between the two of them. "I'm going downstairs then." I took a step toward the door. A moment later, I heard the floorboards creaking. I glanced back, seeing Hope and Llama following closely behind me, whispering to each other in low, conspiratorial voices. Even in the sprawling living room downstairs, the cloying smell of dead flesh followed us. I saw Davy sleeping on a beanbag next to a little girl, looking as peaceful as a tiny angel. "Did you guys see Mother God?" another girl named Aurora asked. She was laying on the couch next to a smoking glass bung. "She is still in stasis," Hope answered grimly, her eyes sad and downcast. "She has not yet awoken to lead us into ascension." Aurora sat up, flicking a lighter and filling up the bong with thick, gray smoke. The skunky smell did nothing to cover up the reek of decaying meat, however. It seemed to combine with it into something even more nauseating and sickening than before. I had not come here for no reason, though I now regretted bringing Davy. My brother, Lee, had been missing for nearly a month. The last time I heard from him, he told me about making new friends in this laid-back compound where everyone ate mushrooms and talked about spirituality all the time. Then his phone shut off, and he seemed to just disappear. I wasn't too worried, to be honest, as Lee was a full-grown man and could take care of himself. But after 5 weeks, my mother and father begged me to try to find him and make sure he was okay. Now that I was here, I wasn't confident that he was. I wondered how to bring up the subject to these nutjobs. Hey, you guys aren't holding prisoners in the basement like some kind of Gary Heidnik horror house, are you? I'm sorry, I'm being rude, Aurora said, turning her dark eyes to me. Like Hope, her face was caked in far too much makeup and had a somewhat blocky, unattractive quality. Her nose was just slightly too big, her forehead too high, her cheekbones too bony. Other than Aurora's hair, which was dyed pink and black, she might have been twins with Hope. She raised the bong to me. You said you're friends with Lee, right? Do you want a hit? I waved my hand in front of my chest. No, I'm good, I said. Actually, Lee's my brother. He dropped off the map a few weeks ago, and my parents just wanted to make sure he wasn't dead in a ditch somewhere. I didn't realize it at that moment, but things were about to get a lot stranger than they already were in the compound. I heard a shrill keening, rising in volume. It sounded like the cries of a panicked, injured animal. It drew closer. My head ratcheted over to stare at the basement door, which flew open. A naked woman with frayed strands of thick rope still tied to her wrists exploded through the threshold. She looked scarecrow thin, and her pale, white flesh covered in deep purple bruises and angry red gashes. Help me, she cried, staring directly at me. The rest of the room went deathly silent. I heard the crying of Davy and the other children as they woke up, surprised by the sudden screaming and slamming. What are you doing out of the learning room? Llama asked in a voice seething with psychopathic coldness. She screamed and tried pushing past Llama and Hope, heading toward the door. Hope fell backwards, her eyes wide and surprised as she smacked her head hard on the dirty carpet. Llama was much faster, however. He reached for his holstered pistol. It came out in a black blur. He fired only once, hitting the woman in the center of the forehead. A small, perfectly round entrance wound appeared like magic. Her head jerked back, her hands clenching into fists. Her naked, battered body fell backwards as if in slow motion. She lay there, bleeding and twitching on the floor, her fingernails and lips turning blue. I heard a lighter flick and saw Aurora nonchalantly filling up the massive 4-foot-tall glass bung. Davy's small body stumbled across the room toward me, tears and snot streaming from his tiny, pinched face. I ran toward him, picking him up and hugging him. I felt the warmth radiating off of him as his arms closed around my neck. Turning, I decided I needed to leave immediately. I started heading toward the door without a word, but Llama stepped in front of it, his emerald eyes flashing with excitement and pleasure. And just where the fuck do you think you're going? He asked, a Cheshire cat grin splitting his bearded face. He ran his fingers through his fire-red hair, looking as calm and collected as a Buddha. Don't you want to see your brother? No, I think I'm good, I stuttered nervously. Llama put the hand with the pistol in it around my neck, leaning on me like an old friend. He's here, you know, he whispered in a conspiratorial voice. He wants to see you, too. We can't let you leave until you see Lee, Hope said from behind me. She had crept up on me, and her voice was only inches away. I saw her holding a long, serrated knife covered with dark crimson stains by her side. The handle looked sticky with gore. Why did you kill that girl? I whispered, feeling Davy's rapid heartbeat beating through his shirt. I cradled my son in my arms protectively, but I was surrounded on all sides, the only exit blocked. Llama shook his head, looking like a disappointed parent. She tried to escape and tell others about us, he said. The world is not ready for us yet. Mother God has not awoken. We try to be compassionate here. If anyone tries to escape, they go to the learning room, where they can be taught anew. She was worthless anyway, Hope spat with hatred, prodding the still corpse of the naked woman with one shoe. Always complaining about how much she missed her family. This is our family now. The intergalactic family of love. Her eyes shone with fanaticism. Do you want to see the learning room? Llama asked coldly. Is Lee down there? I said. Llama shrugged. Why don't we go see for ourselves? He asked in response, jamming the barrel of the pistol into my stomach. Davy's crying had quieted to a soft whimpering. Carrying my son in my hands, I turned and walked across the room towards the stairs to the basement. The steps looked dank and wet, flat slabs of concrete descending into a dark pit. Llama followed close behind me as our steps echoed off the gray walls. I was surprised at just how deep this building went. We went down at least a couple stories in the claustrophobic concrete tunnel. At the bottom, I beheld a nightmarish scene. A single flickering incandescent bulb overhead cast the dungeon in a dim light. A naked man was tied in the center of the room, his arms held straight up above his bowed head with knots of thick, brown rope. Deep, infected slashes ran across his back, the wounds suppurating and spreading in black patches. His entire body appeared like a roadmap of torture marks, bruises and clotted pus. All around the concrete walls of the room, someone had glued thousands of dismembered eyeballs. Most of them looked like they came from animals, but not all. Many were no more than rotting drippings of vitreous fluid and gore, yet others looked fresh. The smell of septic shock and decomposition hung thick and rank in the air, and I realized that not all the fetid odors in the house had come from the corpse of Mother God. From a dark corner, a silhouette stepped forward. I saw the form of my brother, his dark eyes blazing. He looked totally unharmed. He gave me a crooked half-smile. Lee. Holy shit. You're okay? I said, surprised. He nodded patiently. Father God is in charge of the learning room, Llama said. I looked between him and Lee, confused. Then the realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. You're not being held prisoner here? I asked, a rising sense of horror gripping my heart with a suffocating strength. Llama laughed at that, a sardonic, low chuckle of mirth and sadism that echoed through the room. The torture victim stirred, raising his bloody head slowly. I saw one of his eyes had swollen shut. Blood dribbled from a purple lump the size of an orange. His other eye opened, looking watery and unfocused. Help me, he whispered in a voice choked with pain. Lee stepped forward. In a flash, he struck out at the bound man, bringing a fist up into his jaw. I heard a crack of bone as a tooth flew out of his bloody, swollen mouth. Stop it. What the hell are you doing? I asked, still holding Davy in my arms. Davy hid his face into my chest, not looking at the torture and dismemberment surrounding us on all sides like a tomb. He tried to sell us out to the men in black. Lee said, pointing an accusing finger at the naked man as he spat blood on the cold concrete floor. We caught him talking to them. What the hell are men in black? I asked. Lee looked hard at me. We don't really know. They keep showing up here in flashy, colorful cars. They always wear sunglasses to cover their bulging eyes. Sometimes they have extra fingers, and they're always long and twisted. They say they're from the US government, but they don't look like government agents to me. They wear garish ties and colorful hats that no CIA agent would be walking around in, Lee said grimly. Since Mother God went into stasis, I've been leading the group. Before she fell asleep, we were interconnected souls. We think the men in black are sent from the Illuminati, Llama said from behind me. The naked man just shook his head, fresh streams of scarlet dribbling down his chin. I never talked, the man whispered. Father God caught you red-handed. Llama screamed in fury. Lee looked like he would strike the man again, his dark eyes narrowing to slits, but at that moment, Hope ran down the cold, concrete steps, waving her hands with manic energy. They're back. They're at the front door, and they want to see you. Hope cried, looking at Lee for guidance. Lee's face went pale, his eyes widening. The three of them ran upstairs, leaving me alone with the naked man in the room full of rotting eyeballs. Arm yourselves. I heard Lee scream overhead, the words echoing down the cold steps. I glanced back at the naked man, who was hanging unconscious again, the weight of his body dragging painfully against his arms. The sound of shooting reverberated from upstairs in a deafening series of bangs. Someone started screaming in pain. "They're coming in!" I heard Lee yell, his voice tinged with a kind of fear I had never heard there before. I ran upstairs, taking the cement steps two at a time, eager to get out of the learning room and out of this house of such madness. I slammed through the door, sending it smacking against the wall with a clatter. The smell of blood and gunsmoke hung thick in the air, mixing with the omnipresent odor of death that permeated the house. Aurora was laying sprawled in front of the threshold, half of her face blown away and charred to a smoking heap of burnt flesh. It didn't look like the work of any bullet. A spreading puddle of blood wreathed her head like the halo. Llama lay in the corner, half of his chest blackened and exposed. His face was a mask of sweat. His clothes had melted to his skin. With wide, unbelieving eyes, he gurgled, rasping and suffocating. The smell of cooked human flesh and burnt hair hung thick in the air. I thought I could see his heart beating through the blackened gore of his torso. The rest of the cultists lay dead or dying. I saw the children gathered together in a corner, hugging each other, their faces pale. Their cries mixed with the gurgling of the dying. The front door stood wide open, letting the bright light stream in from the dirt parking lot. Silhouetted in the center of this effulgence stood the silhouette of a tall man in a suit. I felt like I couldn't focus on him, as if the lights grew brighter if I tried to look in that direction. He stopped into the room, causing his features to come into focus. It seemed the spell had broken as quickly as it had started. Two more men in black suits followed him a moment later. At first glance, they seemed normal enough from a distance, anyways. And yet, my horror grew as I stared closely at the newcomers. Their faces looked as smooth and perfect as a glass pane. They each had a pair of expensive, black sunglasses. All of the hair on their bodies appeared to be missing, even their eyebrows. They all wore brightly colored, garish ties and undershirts that didn't match their black suits at all. They had no lips. Instead, they looked like they had drawn a crude facsimile of them with blood-red lipstick. Their fingers were long and twisted, looking as if they had far too many joints. Each tapered into points. I realized with increasing unease that they had no fingernails, no lines on their palms. Like their faces, their hands almost looked as if they were made of white marble, free from all lines and imperfections, gleaming with an inhuman smoothness. The man in the front removed his sunglasses. I saw his eyes were alien, monstrous things. They bulged from their sockets, the membranes looking as tight as a snare drum and ready to burst. Long, slitted black pupils ringed by irises the sickly yellow of a suppurating wound stared out at me. "Are you with these humans?" he hissed in a low voice that seemed to split and distort. "Are you a follower of the one they call Mother God?" "No. We're innocent," I pleaded. "I have no idea what's going on here." Davy wailed in my arms, his small face pinched with terror. The man in black put a long, gnarled finger on Davy's forehead. The boy instantly went silent, his eyes suddenly taking on a faraway, glazed look. "That is certainly fortuitous," their leader gurgled. "For Mother God was a thief, stealing our secrets. Thankfully, most humans will regard her as insane and rambling, but we can never be too careful, can we? Not with secrets." The S sound of the last word dragged on until it exploded into a reptilian hissing. I realized all three of the men in black had their smooth, marble-white jaws hanging open. Serpentine tongues flicked out as they hissed in unison. I backpedaled away in terror, seeing the back door of the cabin standing open. The corpses of the cultists littered the floor all around me, puddles of blood spreading under their slowly cooling bodies. In the corner, Llama still twitched, his bloody face a mask of confusion and agony. "I'm not involved in this," I said to the leader, hugging my son tightly. "I didn't shoot at you guys when you came in. I just came here to check on someone, but he's dead now, so you are involved," the leader said. "You've seen too much." He had his small, toy-like ray gun by his side. It looked like it was made out of some gleaming silvery material that constantly shone with an inner light. Put the child down in the corner with the others, he demanded. I just shook my head. We will not harm the children. These are too young to speak or understand anyway. The two men in black behind the leader stepped forward, raising their small, toy-like guns at me. I trembled inwardly. The leader came forward, looking as if he would rip Davy right out of my arms. But, at that moment, chaos broke out. I saw a blur of sudden movement from the corner. Llama's dying, glazed eyes glittered with an ineffable surge of joy and fanaticism. Crawling forward towards the men in black, I saw he had a pistol in one trembling hand. I tried not to look, staring into the leader's reptilian eyes instead. Okay, I said slowly, pretending to put Davy down. At that moment, a series of gunshots rang out, deafening in the enclosed room. The men in black all spun towards Llama, seeing his mutilated, bleeding form only 9 or 10 feet away. Llama's bullets hit the leader in the neck, causing a waterfall of blood to surge down the leader's garish clothing. But it wasn't any sort of blood I had ever seen before. It was as pale and white as the men in black skin, filled with what looked like tiny pieces of opalescent glitter. The other two instantly responded by firing their alien pistols back at Llama, sending orbs of cyclonic fire ripping through the air with the smell of ozone and smoke. I took the opportunity to flee towards the back door. The sounds of the gunshots and the eerie keening of the fireballs followed me all the way to my car. Parked next to me was the car the men in black had come in, a garish, bright orange VW Bug with federal plates on it. I flung open the door to my car, quickly put Davy in the passenger seat and rummaged in the glove box for my knife. I heard it click open. The house had gone silent by now. Knowing I was out of time, I ran toward the VW Bug, stabbing at the two tires on the driver's side. I heard the hissing of air as they quickly started deflating. I hopped in my car, hearing the doors slam open behind me. Two of the men in black ran out, shooting balls of fire at my car. I heard one ping loudly against the truck, sending the car fishtailing wildly. Davy screamed in terror, certainly traumatized by this horrid experience. After nearly crashing, I managed to right the car. Putting the accelerator down as far as it would go, I fled that place of nightmares, seeing balls of fire smashing the trees all around me as I went. Story: The Sick Bâtard. I hear the laughter as I enter the building. It's as if the sick bastard wants me to know exactly where he is. That's fine, I'm coming for him. I've been on his trail for a week, combing through these rundown steel mills, docks, and shipyards. This will be the 10th kid. The last, if I have anything to say about it. Once upon a time, the mild-mannered Adrian Opsted was a janitor at the illustrious Eden City Museum of History, cleaning up in the wake of tour after tour. Standing guard over the trash receptacles as a sentinel of cleanliness, now he takes and kills children. Pretty far from the mop and bucket, aren't we, Adrian? I raise my 1911, pointing it directly into the darkness. I can only imagine all the twisted steel and cold furnaces that surround me. I move around quickly, trying to keep my lumbering form from bumping into loose metal. He's gonna be surprised when he sees my mug. I pass an old sink with a broken mirror hanging above it. What I can make of myself isn't pretty. Dark brown hair cut short, revealing a face that was stitched back together by some of the finest medics the good OL could provide. It's a face even my mother couldn't love. She was repulsed when I came back from the war. I look on the outside how I feel on the inside. Scarred and burned, thanks to Nazi mortar fire. He's making this game of hide and seek easy. The amount of noise he's making could wake the dead. I even see light flickering from a room down the hallway to my right. I waste no time and rush in. The scene before me is straight out of a nightmare. The heat of the candles hits my face as I enter. Adrian kneels in a cloud of green mist before a mass of wriggling flesh and limbs. Giant eyes lock onto mine, and I fall against the door jamb. Head spinning, the only thing I manage to spurt out is a question: what kind of hell could spawn such a thing? I'm back in Bastogne. The vast dark forest covered in white snow, a contrast like good and evil. The blistering cold wind goes through me right before soul-shattering thunder erupts from my left. We're being shelled by the Krauts. I get lucky when the smoke clears, I'm okay. The same can't be said for Sergeant Mott, who was in the foxhole next to me only seconds ago. I think I can make out a portion of his head and shoulder hanging from a tree directly behind me. I keep my head down and pray to the Almighty. I feel something scrapping at my boots. I open my eyes and peer deeper into my foxhole. Then I see it, the rows of teeth, all white, jagged, and cracked. I realize then I'm in more danger than I could possibly imagine, as I'm swallowed up kicking and screaming into this maw. I feel my flesh being torn by razor-sharp fangs. I hear the popping sound of my legs being ripped from my pelvis over my own screams. My last sight before it goes dark is what is left of Sergeant Mott looking at me with those glazed dead eyes. From what is left of his jaw, I can make out a grin. It's only after the pain and a flash of light through my brain do I come to. My Vicen steadies, I focus on what's in front of me. I notice the wooden frame and the sheen of the oil paint. That monster is just a painting, and a damn ugly one at that. Adrian must have stolen it from the museum in between snatching kids. He is in the middle of the room giggling and muttering to himself, while he kneels over a bowl filled with sticks and smoke. The smoke drifts from the bowl and lingers at our feet. I speak slowly and clearly so this crazy son of a bitch can understand. I will not be repeating myself with this psycho. Rise to your feet, then turn and face me, Adrian. He does just that. His limbs pop and snap like he is breaking them just to go straight. Adrian laughs hysterically as he stands. I see the pool of blood and pieces of red flesh at his feet before I see the blade in his right hand. That blade is a wicked thing. Jagged and long. Looks like it was found in a scrap heap, more trash than deadly weapon. I think back to shrapnel that they pulled from me after the blast. When Adrian finally turns to face me eye to eye, I see that I'm the only one of us with a pair of peepers. He looks like he has carved all his features off. Just a blank slate of bone and blood. The pile under him is his. The only things left on his mug are a set of lips hanging loosely over yellowed teeth. I can still see you, Rourke. Adrian sputters. How the hell do you even know who I am? My God gave me that little tidbit. Isn't she lovely, Rourke? Adrian starts to sway and points his jagged blade back to the painting. She's the Great Mother. That supposed to mean something to me, reprobate? I ask, holding back the urge to put a round into what's left of Adrian's mug. Where's the girl? I'm losing my patience, and I've never been one to deal with crazy. Adrian's about as crazy as the whole asylum. The Great Mother did not want her, and I don't blame her. Adrian spins back to face me. She has finally requested that I join her at her side. I'm her loyal and loving son. Adrian moves forward, blade in one hand and bits of his own face in the other. He's giving me the only reason I need. I squeeze off a round. It hits point blank in the hollow spot that used to house Adrian's right eye. His head jerks back hard, he hits the floor. Damn it, where is the girl? I think to myself as I take in my surroundings, and then I hear the sobbing. Very faint and very quiet, but it's there. I stow my 1911 and move behind the painting of the monster, now covered in bits of Adrian's brain. I find a dusty green footlocker. I rush over to open it. I breath a sigh of relief as I find the alive 9-year-old Barbara Horowitz looking up at me. I lift her from the trunk and tell her to close her eyes. She's seen enough madness for more than one lifetime. Carrying her out quickly, I catch one last glimpse at the painting. It must be the blood running down it, but I could have sworn that the beast in the painting was moving. We make it out of the steel mill right as the night sky opens. Here comes one of Eden's famous storms. It seems like it rains more in Eden than any city in the world. I tuck little Barbara under my coat, and we make it to my Lincoln parked near some overturned garbage cans. Got a good deal for her when I came back from the war. Don't know much about cars, but she starts every time I need her to, and that's good enough for me. We slide into the Lincoln, and I uncover Barbara from the depths of my overcoat. She's latched onto me. I tell her I'm taking her home. She'll be with her mommy and daddy real soon. She smiles, it's faint but it's there. We pull up to the house. It's a stately place. Very different from the one-bedroom apartment I rent and use as my office. Barbara's father is well off. He works for the museum, something to do with the art that comes in and out of that place. That's how I put it together that Adrian took little Barbara. He snatched her up thinking she was just a tourist, must have either didn't know or didn't care who her daddy was. Hard to put yourself in the shoes of a crazy person. An old doorman meets us at the top of the driveway. Umbrella in hand as little Barbara and I step out of the car. It's just now that I realize how I must look to this tiny girl. My 7-foot-tall frame and broad shoulders eclipsing the storming night sky. I'm a giant straight out of a fairy tale. She has no use for that umbrella, not a drop was getting to her while I stand over her. Her parents are overjoyed to see her return to their arms. She rushes to embrace her mother and father. I stand in the rain, my part in this is done. The only thing left for me to do is to collect my payment and crawl into a bottle back at the office. I was itching for the burn of the whiskey. The father Franklin Horowitz practically sprints over and grasps my hand. He's a fat little man. He's got to be one of those educated types who didn't join us on the front lines during the war. That's how it went, those who had nothing would to fight while those with money stayed behind and got richer. He disgusts me. Thank you, my good man, for returning our precious girl. I can't begin to tell you the relief we felt seeing her step out of your car. I just nod my head. I know what I've done, I've saved a young girl from a lunatic. Now where is my damn money? I think to myself. As if reading my mind, Franklin passes me an envelope. It's all there, and a little extra for the timely rescue. He stands as tall as he can to reach my shoulders to give me a pat. Like I'm his new best friend. He gets in closer. Did you happen to also find a painting? He looks nervous. Yeah, I found it. It's located across from the dead bastard that stole your little girl. I neglect to inform him of the new coating of blood and brains that rest on it. Now that I think about it, the new color might be an improvement. Outstanding news. I feared it lost. It's an extremely rare piece from an artist who just recently began showing his works. I'll have my men retrieve it post-haste. He turns and walks towards the house. My head is killing me. Whatever Adrian was burning in that bowl got me good. Sent me into a living nightmare. I'm going to ask the boys at the precinct what that stuff was. Make it my personal mission to never encounter it again. I see little Barbara peeking out of the front door. I give her a smile. If I was a betting man, I'd say the kid's going to need to see a shrink. I've got my own fix for what's ailing me waiting for me back at my office. I shrug my soaked overcoat off in the doorway to my bedroom. A large bottle on my nightstand stands proud and unopened. I quickly snatch it up. The whiskey burns at first, but then warms my cold damp bones. I down half the bottle and sit on my cot. I tried sleeping on a bed when I got back from the war, it didn't work. The floor was fine except for bugs and rats. This standard issue cot I found in a pawn shop fixed that problem. I don't make enough money for a real home. Nice big house, driveway with bushes along the sides. This apartment with its leaking pipes, torn wallpaper, and stained carpet is as good as it gets for me. It's late, the booze is starting to kick in and my mind goes heavy. The best part of drinking myself to sleep is that I don't tend to dream. After tonight's episode with Adrian, I hope to God that this time is no exception. The pounding on my front door jolts me awake. I'm in a chair in the corner of the place, gun in hand. Now that's odd, I've never been one to sleepwalk. I holster the 1911 and stand. A headache hits me hard, like a ton of bricks just landed on my shoulders. I stumble to the sink and loudly expel the contents in my stomach. Black bile fills the bottom of my sink. More pounding on the door, some asshole really wants my attention. Or a right cross to the jaw. I'm coming, you prick. I'm really showing off those manners Mama Rourke instilled into her little boy. I swing the door open to find 2 uniforms staring at me. What can I do for you officers this fine morning? I wipe a little of the black from the side of my mouth. I must look presentable when in company. It's 1 in the afternoon, Rourke. The officer on the left says. I recognize him immediately. Officer Owens, if you wanted to speak to me, you could have called. I have a phone. I turn back into my office and realize it's a mess. My desk is turned over, and papers are all over the floor. I think I have a phone somewhere. The officers look less than pleased to be here. Owens speaks up. Rourke, we found the body at the steel mill. You really did a number on him. Whoa, let's slow down a minute, Owens. I lean on the wall to counter the spinning of the room. I only shot the psychopath. He carved himself up. I choked down some more bile. I was just about to write up the report, then send it down to the station. Owens peers around me into my office at the overturned desk. Yeah, sure you were Rourke. The other guy doesn't say a word, just stands there staring at me. He looks young, must be a rookie to the department. He is transfixed at the state of me. I've been a walking freak show since the war. I snap my fingers in his face. He goes for his pistol. Owens steps between us. Rourke, goddammit. Owens puts his weight into my chest and manages to push me back into my place. I don't even fight him. God, I want to go back to sleep. My head is ringing as he shouts and shoves. You absolute prick, I should have the rookie take you in for that slight. Owens turns to the other officer. Go work the hall, give us a damn minute and cool your head. Story, a run-of-the-mill horror story. Lester and his wife of 10 years, Emily, recently moved into a very large Victorian house in rural Maine. Their marriage had been ripped to shreds by the death of their 5-year-old son, and while they loved each other, they had not been coping well. Lester developed an anger problem, while Emily drank a bottle of wine every night. Seemingly everything reminded them of their late son, and Emily had bad dreams every night about the moment she saw her boy being hit by a pickup truck driven by a bigoted man in his 40s. One night, Lester found himself unable to sleep, and wound up sitting on the edge of his bed staring into the wall as if something was about to crawl out of it. Emily could not sleep either, but she remained lying on her side with her eyes half open. Lester, what are you doing? It's 2 a.m. Lester groaned and lit up a cigarette. I can't sleep. I keep thinking about what went wrong with our Toby. I couldn't run fast enough, despite going on 4-mile runs every morning. Emily sat up and stared at her husband. Why are you smoking? Because I have writer's block, Lester barked. I am a somewhat recognizable novelist who publishes a whole book every 7 years, but these days, I can hardly string together a few sentences. Trust me, I know all about disappointment. As a stay-at-home painter, I sell 1 piece a month, and I have depression. Still, we can afford this beautiful home, so why their conversation was promptly cut off by a loud thud coming from the hallway. They looked up in silence before another thud rang out. Lester put on his slippers and bolted towards the door. What are you doing? Asked Emily. What do you think? I'm going to go see what that sound was. He almost went to the closet for his gun, but then he realized that a weapon would not be conceivably useful in that sort of situation. He figured that if there was something out there, he could yell loud enough for it to run away. So, he simply cleared his mind and exited the room. Lester stepped carefully down the hallway before noticing that a door to his right was open. He knew he closed that door before going to bed, so he thought this was strange. Still, without a second thought, he entered the room and closed the door behind him. The room was pitch black, but he did not think to turn on the lights. Instead, he retrieved a cigarette lighter from the pocket of his sweatpants and flicked it on. From the other end of the room, he heard a faint growling sound. He thought that it must be a dog that the previous homeowners left behind, so he approached it without hesitation. With each step, the growling got louder and louder, but this did not deter him. He thought this dog must have been starving, so he bravely pushed on. When he got closer, lightning flashed and he could not believe what was illuminated. It was not a dog at all, but rather, an alien. He realized that this made a lot of sense in that it did not really need to make sense. It was an alien, so that was all he needed to know. The alien reached out, and both of them disappeared. The next morning, Emily decided to move back to New York City. She did not attempt to sell the house nor pack any of her things. She just got in her modest sedan and drove away, crying as the trees passed by. Story, barn loft, horror story. I stopped counting the days after I got around 15. I would have kept going, but I couldn't. I had lost all hope. We stopped wondering if jumping down to escape was an option after watching two boys try to make a break for it. They injured their legs so bad, they couldn't get up, and we watched him drag them away from our sight. We didn't see them again. One by one, the companions I had made came and went, until some of them stopped coming back to the loft altogether. They had been there longer than me, but I knew my time to go where they went was coming soon. Whenever I heard his ladder clang against the loft, I panicked, only remembering to breathe when I wasn't next. Normally when the ones who were taken came back, they never said anything more than a few mutters about experiments. They stayed like that, unmoving, barely talking, until they were taken down again. One girl was able to tell a bit more about what had happened. He would take them into a room that looked almost like one at a hospital, strap them down onto a table, and put an IV into their veins, which coursed an unknown substance into them. He said it would change them. There was more she wasn't telling us, and I couldn't tell if she'd stopped talking because she couldn't remember or just didn't want to relive it. We never knew his motive until it was evident that a couple who had come back had noticeably changed. The look in their eyes was wilder, they moved in awkward, jerky movements, they weren't human anymore. The rest of us stayed far away from them for as long as we could, unsure of the better option, becoming them or disappearing forever. We didn't have a choice, but the thought of one or the other was almost as terrifying as our situation. It wasn't hard to pick up on his schedule. He might have been mad, but he was methodical. The plan was to wait for him to leave with his tray of tools, none of which I recognized. He always took a long time to clean them. We didn't know exactly where that was, only that it was outside the barn. I didn't know whether to be anxious or flattered that he took the time to clean them up before using them on his next experiment. After he had left with the tray, we were to crawl out the hole in the wall where multiple kids had unknowingly teamed up to tear away at the old boards of the wall when he wasn't there. It wasn't very noticeable on the inside, because we'd just put the boards in front of the hole and hide it. Even though he kept us in a loft, making it so we couldn't jump down on the inside, the outside proved to be easier. Through the hole, we were able to see a small roof right there that we would be able to get on to use to get onto the ground. I wasn't as optimistic as everyone else. I had almost started to look forward to my turn with him and wanted to know what would happen. I was still terrified of him, though. I saw what the stuff did and the IV did to the others before they were killed or turned into a mutant. It wasn't something to look forward to, but what else was I supposed to hope for when escape hadn't been an option? When the time came to execute our plan, I may have actually felt a twinge of optimism, though I found myself saying it wasn't going to work. But, after all that time of being here, watching everyone around me disappear, maybe I was finally getting out. We uncovered the hole and the first person went through. Everything was going as well as it could. Until that first person on the outside fell through the roof we were supposed to get on. In a panic, someone else went out, too, maybe to see if it was possible to avoid falling through as well. They didn't and managed to lower themselves enough to safely jump onto the ground. This gave the rest of us hope. However, the crash of someone falling through the roof had not gone unnoticed. He was back inside now, yelling. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I didn't need to. I was buzzing with so many thoughts and feelings, my blood turned cold as I realized this may not work. The sound of his footsteps urged us to get on with the next kid's escape. The clang of his ladder caused us to scramble to get through the hole before he could make it up there. I got through and saw the opening in the roof that had been left from the first escapee. It was barely avoidable, but the ones who went out before me had went around it and made it to the ground. I could, too. All I had to do was lower myself onto the ground. Even though they could have already run off, the ones who had made it out first waited, arms open, ready to catch me. It all happened so fast. I was pushed before I could figure out how to get down fast enough without hurting myself. I fell onto the people below me and someone else fell on top of me. It just had to be one of the mutants who had pushed me, now crushing me between them and the people underneath me. We were disoriented, the sunlight was blinding, and the sounds of nature suddenly around us overwhelming. Our limbs were a tangled mess. I couldn't tell my arms and legs from the people I landed on or the mutant kid weighing down on me. I heard words of praise and the mutant's weight lifted from my body. I thought we were free until I saw him. He caught us before anyone could make a move to get up. Bye and see you again in the next videos and stories.